Hi, Milo. Nice to see you again.
Yes.
It's been ages. So let me just, before we start with the conversation, just a very short introduction. Welcome to you and welcome to everyone who is watching us now live on YouTube or who will watch us and listen to us later on YouTube. This is the digital edition of the Philosophical Theater program, which was established originally at the Croatian National Theater in 2014. Now, in cooperation with the Bitev Theater from Serbia, we are having this online series in this online public space. In our first edition, 2 weeks ago, I spoke with the theater director Oliver Frljic. In the last one, it was Anja Šuša and Maja Pelević. And in the next one, in 1 week, at the same time on Thursday, it will be Maja Pelević with Stefan Kegi. So what we are trying to do is to recreate a public space and to speak with people from the theater world about not only the theater, but about the current global phase of the coronavirus crisis. I said too much. I'm really glad that today I'll have the opportunity to speak with Milo Rau. It sounds a bit stupid to announce you as a Swiss theater director, because I think you are definitely a world theater director, and art, especially the kind of art you are doing, knows no nationality and no borders. You just actually were rehearsing for your new theater play, Antigone, in the Amazon, actually in Brazil, in Amazon. The coronavirus crisis hit you, so to say, there. I mean, I even saw a photo with you and Bolsonaro above you in a face mask on television, and yes. you had to return from the Amazon to Germany, right? Perhaps can you just tell us where are you at the moment? It's really great to have you here. And how did you succeed to escape Brazil? How did it look like to be in the midst of the Amazon during the coronavirus crisis? And then later we can come to theater and different topics.
Yeah, thanks for having me in your program, Srećko. It makes some time that we met last time, I think, live. It was in Cologne, I think, and I'm back in Cologne.
In Cologne,
I think last time it was in Cologne, no?
Yeah, and we had a phone call. I think you were in Matera. And I
told you that you joined there.
During the good old days when we were still planning ahead.
Yeah. So I'm back in Cologne with my family, my daughters, my girlfriend. That's where I live. My theater is in Ghent. It's stopped. It's locked down, like I think all theaters, like the Bitev Festival. So, and I came back 3.5 weeks ago from Brazil. I flew from Sao Paulo, then to Amsterdam, and from Amsterdam to Germany. So, and since then I'm here chatting by Zoom, like everybody. And my plan was I was doing in the last years a trilogy called the Trilogy of the Antique Plays, and for the Oresteia, and then for the New Gospel. So the
Oresteia, actually, I had an opportunity to watch the performance at the Bitev Theater.
Okay. Yeah.
But the Matera project, not yet. But maybe you can tell us. Yeah, let's start with Amazon, from where you came from.
And the third play is in this trilogy is the play Antigone. So I wanted to stage Antigone in the north of Brazil, because perhaps the story of Antigone is quite known. It's this antagonism in between Antigone, which is the traditional law. It's the law of gods. She wants to bury her brother. And on the other side, you have Creon, the rational law of the state. A very classical fight. And of course, we were interested to do this in a context where it makes sense, where it creates sense. And some years ago, when I was in Brazil, I decided to do it there, together with the landless movement, a big social movement, perhaps the biggest one in the world, I think, of people occupying monocultures, for example, taking land, realizing the agricultural reform, which was never realized, but which is fixed in the Brazilian constitution. And we decided to do it together with these activists from this movement and indigenous activists from the very north in Brazil, Amazonia, Pará, Amazonia. So these two states where the big agribusiness is confronting the last resorts of the indigenous peoples. So you have this conflict that is described in the play by Sophocles into today. So for example, you have the last not contacted peoples of this planet, I guess, living there. And we started to do this last November, rehearsing, and we wanted to have the premiere on the 17th of April, so some days ago, on the block Transamazzonica, where happened the massacre 25 years ago, because the choir of our of the play is built by survivors of one big massacre made by the militia against the landless movement. Our Antigone is Kaisara, an indigenous actress and activist. And so we tried to have, like in many plays I did, all the roles made by people that has a direct political contact to what are they playing. And I think it was 4 weeks and a half ago that it really started in Brazil. 1 second.
Yeah, sure. We are all at home. I mean,
it's my daughter. Yeah. Well, it's the older daughter. She's searching for the iPad, actually.
No, I like this kind of interruption, reminding us that we are actually at home and not on a theater stage.
That's true. That's true. I'm interrupted the whole day. I think the interruptions are my real work of the day, actually. And then it started in Europe. When we were there, I remember the lockdown of my theater, and then the school of my daughter stopped, and then the quarantine started in Germany and in Belgium and so on and so on. But I was not taking this like personal, you could say. It was quite interesting to see how the first lockdown until the very last moment, the
interruption.
In it. Yes.
The inevitable interruption.
True. And the same happened again in Brazil, that the whole movement and everybody was kind of sure that just if we want to continue, we can continue. But then we made kind of a deal, and I think it even seemed a bit paranoid to the people there, that we were saying when there's the first case in the whole state, then we stop and we postpone to November. And we made a plan and we went into quarantine, so the whole team.
Mm-hmm. So you were in quarantine already back in Brazil?
We were in quarantine already back in Brazil, in the north, in Marabá, so in the Amazonian region. And then the first case happened. I remember it was reported in somewhere on the internet. I mean, this state is big like Spain, Italy, and Germany together, so it's huge. But this was kind of our idea, and then we postponed it. We went back through Brasilia to Sao Paulo, and there we waited for a flight because our flights were already stopped in April even. But then we had to fly to Amsterdam, and we went back. And since then, I'm corresponding with especially Kaisara, of course, because we wanted to open the Wiener Festwochen, another festival that will not happen in May.
Yeah, ironically, I'm at the moment in Vienna.
Yes.
I came here to curate a program with Oliver Frljić at the Burgtheater, and I'm just stuck here in this city. I mean, I would love to leave already, but it's kind of, as you said, at the beginning, the feeling is, that something is approaching. And I've actually obsessively followed the whole thing since mid-January, I think. Yeah. But then at the same time, I think that's a characteristic of the humans. At the same time, you see that it is approaching, but all the time, I think everyone was thinking, oh, it won't hit us. But if the pandemic showed anything, it is that it's a global event. And I mean, let's speak about Brazil a bit, and then later we can come to the new gospel and Matera. What I'm really interested in, you've been there. You've seen the reactions by Bolsonaro, another dangerous clown similar to Boris Johnson, all these populist leaders who were laughing at it at the beginning. I mean, Bolsonaro is still coughing publicly, believing in this kind of, I don't know, what kind of universe. But maybe if you can tell us, you already said that Antigone is a suitable play to speak about the Amazon. So in this kind of composition, would the agro business be Creon, like in your play, or where is Bolsonaro in this case? On the one hand, you have the corporations, which are obviously participating and complicit in the deforestation of the Amazon rainforest. But at the same time, you also have a populist leader, this kind of authoritarian clown / dangerous clown. How does it look like in the composition of Antigone?
Of the play? Yeah, I understand. The interesting thing in the play of Sophocles, and I also think in how tragedy works, is that you have two concepts, and there is not the good and the bad concept. So you could read Antigone as a crazy leftist antagonist, as somebody who is just not integratable into modern society. And on the other hand, you can read Creon, and that's what we do, as somebody who is somehow rational, who tries to find a place for Antigone, but there's the reason of the state, and he can't bury the enemy of the state because he would lose authority. That's a bit how, by the way, Slavoj Žižek even wrote it as one version of a total collapse of the state. If Creon accepts the extremism of Antigone, it would destroy the state. So for us, let's say it's more a concept. So first we had I asked a former minister of culture to play it, who is also an actor, but who is more from the left and is kind of disappointed. So for us, you could say that this figure of Creon is a mix of agrobusiness, of Western thought, of even Lula, of Bolsonaro. All is in it, you could say. So it's more a combination of it. And I think this is an interesting approach, because when you take Bolsonaro, I think Bolsonaro is more somebody who comes after everybody's suicide, the whole society suicide themselves. Then Bolsonaro would come after the trilogy of the Oedipus family. Then, of course, the populism arrives, and that's how he behaves. He's really the end of history. I personally, I have to say, a bit kind of, I couldn't believe it. I thought it's a strategy, a media strategy, and he just plays the clown like Trump, They just do as if they love death, they want to destroy civilization, but really to the end. And now when Corona happened, it's kind of when the Second World War broke out and you saw Hitler, he is really crazy, He wants to destroy Europe. Here you see Bolsonaro, he is really crazy, And of course you can have a kind of a neo-Marxist interpretation why this guy is kind of evaluating the situation, and he knows, because he's dealing with the agribusiness, he's dealing with the big Protestant movement, so he knows that he has to support economy, and even if some people dies, and you could even say that on a biopolitical point of view, he's taking in account that, for example, the immune system of the indigenous people is weak, and that he can destroy them. Because one thing very interesting, I don't know if it's kind of unbelievable, what he did in the very beginning of the crisis, when he understood that it will be a big epidemic, he said to his organization, the state organization, which is in charge of the indigenous affairs, to contact them, to tell them that there is an epidemic. So to contact the non-contact people to tell them that there is corona. So, I mean, it was labeled genocide, actually, or attempt of genocide. So he knows what he does on the one hand, I think. And on the other hand, he's just a crazy clown.
This reminds me, you probably know it, this famous quote by Jacques Lacan, who says that a fool, a crazy person who believes that he is a king, is not more crazier than a king who believes that he's a king.
Yeah.
I mean, that's also Bolsonaro, Boris Johnson, and so on. But what you just said, I didn't know that. But it brings me to one of your teachers. If I'm not wrong, you were studying under Tsvetan Todorov, right? It just reminded me on a beautiful book by Todorov, The Conquest of America.
Yeah.
He actually says that the way, I mean, it's not something new, but I think the narrative and the book by Todorov is really useful today. The way, the colonizers succeeded to occupy Mexico was done by a disease, by infection.
Yeah.
Then, what you have today is a kind of repetition of this, where Bolsonaro would actually be happy if the virus just solves the problem of the indigenous people.
Finishes the colonization, because the colonization was never finished, because you could say, or the capitalist colonization was never finished because Brazil is too big. And that's also why the constitution, they gave this land, this huge land, to the indigenous people, because they thought we will never need it. But this changed in the last 20, 30 years. And there is also a kind of a little irony that this time it's not Europe bringing the disease to the Americas, it's China bringing it to Europe. So where is the Weltgeist today coming from? I like this little irony. But there's also one good thing, I would say, in it. Watching, for example, the situation in Africa, it's not talking about what will happen in the big economic crisis, because this will be the real problem for the planet, I think, what comes after Corona, if we don't react in a solidary way. But we can see that, for example, Africa, but also the societies of Latin America, not all of them, but some of them are very resistant also. The civil society, not the modern health system, but the traditional health system, perhaps the demographic situation, because populations, for example, in the Congo are much younger. So there is a situation that, because still it's a disease of the old white man, Corona, in a strange way, you know? So, these societies are quite resistant. So I think 2-3 weeks ago, when I was writing this article about Antigone, I was expecting an impact in the global south that would be, the impact of the epidemic itself would be much, much, much bigger than it is at the moment. It's big still, but still malaria is bigger, and still the outcome, the economic outcome, the hunger, the complete destruction of all the raw materials, prices falling, and all this is the real impact.
Yeah, I think you just mentioned prices falling. I mean, one of the events which happened was, of course, that the oil went below zero. It was worth less than nothing. I mean, that's also a title of a book by Slavoj Žižek.
It was 240 points under zero. On the 20th of April, or even on the 21st, I think even on the birthday of Adolf Hitler, the price of oil fell 200 points.
That's interesting, the point you just made. I mean, of course, we can joke about it, but my biggest fear is precisely that what is happening now, and with this fall, I mean, because obviously they will not keep the oil in the ground. I mean, Trump is already working on bailing out the big oil companies and so on. And maybe Africa, as you said, and some Latin American countries which used to be resilient will come out in a better scenario than I think they will. I hope you're right. But what will hit them in the same way it will hit us is precisely the deep recession, our sort of 1929, and we all know what came after 1929. That's my big fear.
Fascism.
But before we go there, maybe I know you prepared a little surprise.
Yes. So when I heard about this oil price falling under zero, so on that day, on the 21st of April, now it's back, of course, it's just one moment, but it's a historic moment because it never happened. And for me, it was metaphorical. And I asked the composer to compose a little song for us in a Wagnerian mood, of course. So I will try to.
Great. I suggest that we listen to it. Yeah.
Yes, we listen to it.
Okay. It's a warning, especially if it's Wagnerian. I shut up now.
So this is an intro to put you in the mood, Srećko.
I cannot hear anything yet. No, I cannot hear. Maybe try to go. Okay. Maybe we should play it one more time.
It's very in the background now. It's just preparing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And now, slowly.
Yeah, so let's come back here. I really like this. I like it. It's almost like a Chaplin or Groucho Marx kind of.
Of joke.
Yeah.
So, where are you? Ah, here we are. Yeah.
So we are back. Yeah, I mean, that's what worries me the most. I mean, what we just showed, it's an image which can be contrasted also to the images of the coronavirus crisis and the infections of and the contagion rising on the graphs. And there you have an opposite graph here. But what I'm really worried at this moment is, I mean, just look at the theater, look at the public spaces, look at the restrictions of movement. Now they're speaking about a kind of immune passport, you know, that you could travel only if you are tested negative, and all these kind of questions which are still in the air. And being here in Vienna, it kind of reminds me again, of course, on Stefan Zweig and Die Welt von gestern, the world of yesterday, where he describes how before the First World War, you could travel freely without a visa and so on. And I think even us, we got accustomed to this kind of traveling post 9/11, which wasn't really the best kind of traveling. And now we can also see how dirty the planes were and how much surveillance there was. But I think the new sort of traveling, the new kind of traveling will be much worse, you know, with more surveillance. Once this operation again becomes kind of normalized. And this brings me actually to your other big, I wouldn't say it's just a play, it's more than a play, to the new gospel, which you were doing in Matera. Because I think thanks to this play, at least to myself, once we had that telephone conversation in September last year,
yeah.
I started to realize and to know the situation in Italy a bit better, the situation with the refugees who are working, you know, under the governance of the mafia, so that a tomato could end up on a table in Cologne or in Vienna. And what I find interesting, but also warning, is this parallel with the current situation. Like I'll tell you today, I have just read in the Austrian Standard that the Austrian government just made a deal with Romania that direct charter trains would come from Romania to Austria, because around 70,000 people here in Austria work in care. You know, they are care workers who come from Eastern and Southern Europe.
Yeah.
And again, if you go to Italy, you will see those who are working in the fields, so that someone like me or you, or some people who are even more privileged than us, could have a tomato or asparagus on the table. You need to have this kind of exploitation, exclusion, which is being hidden. Although in the case of Italy, it's even more, I don't know what is worse, this kind of legalized exploitation, like in Germany, where you have 300,000 seasonal workers picking up strawberries, asparagus, or here in Austria. Or is it worse what's happening in Vienna, which is not really state governed, not in Vienna, in Italy, which is not really state governed, but it's governed by the mafia. So maybe, did you think also on what you have done in Matera from the perspective of coronavirus? You know, how would you put these two together? And what's happening with the project now? Because I know it's a continuation, which you are also filming, and then it was supposed to be performed in different places. I talked too much, sorry.
I mean,
too many questions.
Yes. I don't know if I can give answers to everything, but I think at the very moment of Corona, because the treatment of the refugees in the south of Italy and, for example, at the borders of Greece in Moria, are very similar and very different at the same time, because they are refugees or people without rights that the capitalism or Europe needs somehow, like in South Italy. And there are other people they think they don't need. And then you see how they treat it differently. For example, when you go to the situation in South Italy, and I have to say, for me, it was the worst situation I somehow ever saw. I mean, of course, you can also go to the borders of Greece, but
yeah.
the thing.
But that comes from someone who has been in Congo. This what you just said, so it must be. No, really.
It's much worse, because the very tragic reality there is that it's people coming through Libya to Europe. What they live there completely traumatized. Then they are living under the law of mafia there. No possibility of regularization. They are completely delegalized. 500, 600,000 people. And they can't go out of Italy. because of the Dublin treaties. So they are locked, they are slaves. They are slaves in the hand of the mafia, and they work on the monoplantations for tomatoes, for oranges, and so on. And they have to work there for 20, 30 euros. It's like going back to the times of Marx. There is no possibility of trade unionism, because if they make a little revolt, mafia will just say, they don't have even to kill them. They will say, okay, you don't come tomorrow, I take the other ones. We have 600,000 people, you know, like traveling in Italy, going from field to field, living in this kind of wild camps. And if they don't need them anymore in that space, police is destroying the camps that are collaborating with the mafia. They go to the other camps, and they work in another space where is the next big thing, the oranges, for example. So this is a crazy situation based on a strategy of a kind of reversed neoliberalism, you could say. You don't go where the hands are cheap, you bring the hands that are cheap here, and then you lock them here. It's really the situation like in Roman times. And you have the mafia, you have, of course, the state, the Italian state. I'm very happy that now the government changed. I mean, during our project, it changed. And they now try to, or there are a lot of initiatives, like in Portugal, to regularize these people, because they said we can never stop the rule of mafia if we have no legalization of these people, if they don't have papers, if we don't even know how many, where they are. So the state has no idea what's happening there. And at that moment, we were deciding to do what we called, I have a little paper here, a Jesus film, but it was also called Revolt della Dignità. So Revolt of Dignity, following the quote, "This land is your land." As you know, the song from Woody Guthrie, "This land is my land," saying that we need a regularization of these people. They need housing, they need healthcare, they need rights, because you are always in this absurd situation as a refugee, that if you don't have a place you can be, you don't get papers to work. If you don't have work, you don't get possibility to have a domicile. So there's this absurdity, and we tried to give a big push on creating what we call the Casa della Dignità, the houses of dignity, occupying houses, regularizing these houses, and then these houses become the possibility for these people to get papers and work.
But also in the play, as far as I know, also in the play itself, it was mainly, or all the actors were actually real refugees, right? The plantation workers. I
mean, it's a quite interesting story. It's true, yeah, it's true. It's a quite interesting story, because Matera is the city, cinematographic city of Italy, you could say. Many Jesus films were made there. The most known, I think, is from Pasolini from '64. Then another one, a bit trashy, from Mel Gibson, was made in 2004, The Passion of the Christ. And in the beginning, when it was the City of Culture, of European City of Culture in 2019, and they were asking me to do a film there, or to do a project there. And I said, hey, let's do a Jesus film. And then we started to call the actors from Pasolini and Mel Gibson if they want to reunite and make a Jesus film with us. But then we went there, and around the city, and I just somehow knew it, but I didn't believe it. I went to the camps, and I understood that all these people living there, this is the people Jesus today, as kind of the leader of a landless movement of his time, he would fight for. He would fight for these people. And then we searched, we made castings, and we found Jesus, Ivan Sagnier, an activist from Cameroon, working came as a student to Italy, then worked on the plantations when he was 10 years ago, and he made the first revolt at that time. 10 years ago, he made the first strike. He stopped on a whole field, and I was asking him, but how did you do this? Because, you know, you have, as you described it in Austria, you have people from Romania, people from Cameroon, from Congo, a lot from Kenya, and so on. And these people would never, it's divide impera, they would never collaborate. So you have different kinds of mafia, and they are playing one part against the other. And he said, yeah, it's simple. I had 12 sub-leaders from the 12 different countries.
So he's a smart organizer.
He's a very smart organizer. And then I said, 12 sub-leaders. Wow, I know the concept. It's like in the Bible. And then we decided to also have 12 apostles from the different from the different countries or groups of farm workers. Also, of course, Italian.
Basically, the text was being shaped once you came there. Once you came to Matera, then you started to shape the text.
Then we started. I mean, the film we then did, of course, now are finishing the editing is a mix of the real revolt we did with a manifesto, with a lot of organizations. We had a march into. That's where I wanted to invite you into the city of Matera to push these laws into the system of Italy. So this is one part. Another part is in costumes. I mean, we did. This is Ivan Sanier. So he really played Jesus. We had hundreds of actors making the Passion. Of course, you can't change the words of the Bible. So we played the Passion as it is played, and we filmed it as a film, a mix of these real actors from Pasolini and Mel Gibson and the activists. And on the other hand, it was a social political project founding this Casa della Dignità. So it was kind of a art, political, whatever project. So like, I don't know, but it was also a Jesus film. Everything that happened was step by step. I give you an example. For example, when one of the big camps was closed by police, we did also a kind of a march, a first march there. This organization organized, we helped and filmed. And when it was closed, the police officer who closed it, I went to him and I asked him, we are doing a Jesus film. Perhaps you want to play the officer of the Roman soldiers. And he said, yeah, I would like to play in a film. It's great in Italy. Everybody wants to play in a film. So he's playing the police officer. He's playing the police officer torturing Jesus and stuff like that. So everybody took his role. For example, the mayor of Matera, he was Simone, the guy who is helping Jesus to carry the cross, because he was saying, I'm carrying so many crosses in my daily work as a mayor, but don't make it too heavy. Everybody took his role.
Yeah, what happened in the end to one of the actors from Pasolini's Jesus, Giorgio Agamben? What happened with him in the end? Did he participate or not? Because Giorgio Agamben was an actor in Pasolini.
He was one of the apostles, and in the very beginning, because we asked Enrique Razzocchi, his Jesus, he became John the Baptist in our film. He's now 74, a great guy. And we asked Giorgio Agamben too, because he was a student at that time playing. He's not talking in the film; he's just there. It's quite beautiful. It changed a bit the concept of appearing in media today. He's just there, silent. And then we wrote him asking him if he wants to participate, and he said I never had such fast response, saying like in 5 minutes. Yeah, that's really interesting. I remember Matera. I would like to do it. And then very strange, what then happened. And then we wrote him, okay, then let's see for the details, etc. But there it stopped. that was it. Perhaps it was a bit too much craziness and cinematography. I don't know. I have to ask him actually.
Yeah, I don't know what happened. I haven't been in touch with him for a few years, but I just remembered. Yeah, he was one of the characters there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you know what's happening with those people today? I mean, with your actors who are not really actors, but obviously they are plantation workers, and now with this crisis and.
Yeah, there are two things. One thing, of course, is the camps are partly blocked, partly not blocked. A lot of people can't go to work, but they are restarting. I mean, if work has to be done, it is done. I mean, this is the rule of the big enterprises. So and of course, they have no healthcare, etc., etc. On the other hand, what happened, I think now a bit more than a week ago, that for the first time, the Minister of Agriculture in the Senate announced that these people has to be regularized. It was even a kind of a shock in Italian politics. Perhaps you followed that.
I didn't follow that, but you mentioned the Portuguese example, which I find really
Portuguese is impressive. Is what
yeah,
very
I think
impressive.
everyone should do that. What Portugal did with regularizing, all those people, and actually by helping them not to get infected, you're helping the whole society not to get
infected. Of course,
this is now,
of
yeah.
course. Especially, I mean, in Greece, look at Greece, and the same in Italy. That's why we created this Casa della Dignità. In Greece, you have no tourism at the moment. All the hotels are empty. Come on, guys. I mean, it's really absurd. What are you doing? It's ununderstandable. It's inhuman. I think we should write an international and open letter to push all these organizations, the governments, the European Commission, everybody to change the situation, to regularize people immediately now. Immediately.
Yeah. I fully agree, but I think, what the European Commission recently did, I mean, Italy is one of the good examples, is actually deepening the crisis even more.
Absolutely.
By rejecting the Euro bonds, the Corona bonds, basically Italy's GDP will fall down like the little melody you showed with Wagner. Yeah. And then you will have new austerity, you will have new precariousness, you will have misery. I mean, you can see it already in Italy. I mean, again, not coronavirus as such, but what's coming after is, I think, becoming much more dangerous. But to jump to another topic, because I've read your, and then slowly we can also go to the questions. I see some questions.
Great.
I've read your wonderful article in Tageszeitung, the German Taz, which is not just about the Antigone and the Amazon, but you have a very nice paragraph on what you say in German. I don't know how to translate it. We can try together. What is interesting to you, and also to me, I must say, in the coronavirus crisis, is what you call the Verzerrung der Zeitebene. Mm-hmm. I don't know how to translate it, but basically...
The distortion of the time, of the feeling of time. Yeah.
Yes, I find this very interesting because I remember 2 or 3 years ago, I was in London having lunch with Alfonso Cuarón. And then he told me, Srećko, what I will tell you now, don't tell it to anyone. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm telling it now to everyone. But he said, wouldn't it be wonderful if the whole planet could just stop? And we could invent a sort of pause. And I must say, at that moment, I really loved the idea. But I said, but if it's just one day, it won't make a big change. And he said, but even if it's one day, you can just imagine the air travel going down and everything. Mm. And now you had a kind of dystopian scenario of this kind of global planetary pause, like the day the Earth stood still, this old science fiction. Yeah. But not necessarily everything is bad. So maybe can we just start a bit brainstorm, talk about the positive side effects of this change of temporality, of time, because we were so much constrained and immersed in something what Mark Fisher would call capitalist realism, this 24/7 capitalism, which actually us, the cognitive workers, are now again into it, You are at home, I'm at home, not my home, unfortunately, but working all the time, we are now in a kind of public space, a new public space, which is not really public, it's on 2 Silicon Valley platforms. One is YouTube, the other one is Zoom. But at the same time, I think what we have and what you showed in your article in Taz is this change of time. So do you think that out of this period of quarantine, this 1 or 2 months, that something good will come out of it, that people will start to build a different relation towards time itself? Do you think that's too naive or too utopian of me to think so? Or do you think that we will very quickly come back to this capitalist notion of time?
No, not at all. For example, when I showed you this little Wagnerian song of the falling oil price, of course, I know that the problem of the falling oil price will be a big problem for the global south again. I mean, okay, you have also in Canada and US, but of course it will be translated in an economical problem that is negative. But of course, there is also a very positive metaphor. It's kind of perhaps quoting your book. What's the title? Not music.
Which one? The Poetry from the Future.
The Poetry from the Future. For me, this is kind of music from the future, It's kind of song announcing the end of the oil age. And of course, I want to believe in this. For me, it is a historical moment, a historical melody. And I think that this kind of stop of this complete fall down and then boom, and there's a kind of a silence, and the orchestra doesn't know what they should play now. Nobody is asking, so what shall we do? So I think this hiatus is the one thing. I think another thing is that we understood, or we could redefine a kind of a connection in between what we know and that we can act, and we can act. Unfortunately, sometimes in a very fascist way, as you described it, renationalization, every state is acting for himself. If you are citizens of no state or stateless citizen, then you have a big problem. So there is a big problem, but we understood, okay, governments can force, for example, the big enterprises to stop, to people to go home. Because I remember only some weeks ago, it was said it's impossible. This is all too complex. This is all too big, like before the First World War, when everybody was saying, but we will not fight against each others because it's the same families, the transnational enterprises, you know, but it can happen like this. And I think now, of course, is the moment of asking, when we give 100 billions, 100 millions to for example, Volkswagen, we have to politicize this situation. What will happen after with these enterprises? How do they have to act? You know, and I think what we are doing at the moment, and I feel it in my sector, the art sector, and I feel it, of course, in the politics, that everybody is thinking about the best way back to what they call normality, but is actually the very perverse, non-normal, catastrophic situation of going to climate crisis very fast. And I have the impression, if we don't learn the lesson out of this full stop, of this moment of, you have the impression that for one time again in neoliberalism, you can act again as a community. If you don't use this general rehearsal, we are really fucked and we deserve it, you know?
Yeah,
so it's kind of the last chance. And I think this is an extremely important moment to, especially for the left, especially for the left movement, to see how can we hold it? How can we translate it in constant action, in constant solidarity?
I mean, it's a tough question and a big question, because I think everything is changing so rapidly, and let's say the opposition is already in quarantine. I mean, I'm just looking at, you know, these populist leaders from Boris Johnson to Trump, but also many others. Look at what Viktor Orban is doing. Actually, everyone is very quick to use the situation and crisis to implement their wet dreams, you know, all the dystopian totalitarian desires they had. And at the same time, when I look around, even if you read the media, it is almost as if only coronavirus exists. You know, what you just mentioned, climate change, it didn't disappear. I mean, it's actually accelerating even more, even if now the skies are clear and so on. The data about the ice melting and bushfires.
No, it's not changing, of course not.
I mean, we've seen, that was shocking for me, 1 week ago or 10 days ago, wildfires in Chernobyl. You know, that was one of my last visits last year. I visited Pripyat and Chernobyl, and I was thinking, okay, this is also a possible future. The nuclear threat didn't disappear. And now what you have is something what they call tipping points, but I would rather call them eschatological tipping points, not ecological, because you have a pandemic, climate change, nuclear age, and then in Zagreb there was an earthquake in all of this situation.
In the middle of it.
At the same time that we have simultaneous threats which are reinforcing each other. And I think my biggest fear, what you said, I see it in the cultural sector as well. First of all, I feel very sorry for many of my colleagues,
of course,
with whom I worked for and with whom I worked and so on, who are losing their jobs. The future, who knows what will happen with theater, but also with movies, with writers, and with all sorts of cultural events. But at the same time, my fear is that what you mentioned, again, to come back to your article in Tageszeitung, that, you know, what if, and you can see it already, that this period of utter crisis is being culturalized, you know, and what if it also becomes commodified? I mean, you can see now how most of the festivals, theaters, directors of theaters are kind of lost, you know, what do we do now? You know, now we have to provide online. But I think this is not a solution, you know, to turn everything into the online world, you know. So I think in that sense, I mean, as you said in the article, on the one hand, we can expect everyone will be doing Camille, Boccaccio, and so on. And on the other side, you can see that, this cultural industry is kind of trying to find a way out of the crisis. But I'm afraid, to say that if we will just translate everything in this digital world, this is not a solution. I don't know how you see it, because you're also director of an influential theater in Ghent.
What you see is that if you don't continue with the machine, the people will lose their jobs. And I think this is the big contradiction we are living in, that you have to produce to give money to the people. And I think if we don't disconnect this, we can now longly talk about basic income if you want, but we don't have to. But if you don't disconnect this, I don't see how you can get out of this problem. Because what I see in my sector, and I'm talking also about my job as a theater director, we have this architecture from the 19th century, 900, 800, 700 places, and it's how do we refill it? And everybody is thinking about how can we refill it? How can we come back the fastest possible in the rooms of the 19th century to the canon of the 19th century? How can we come back to bourgeois normality? And of course, there will be a lot of Corona porn with Mozart with masks and empty rooms and a bit claustrophobic post-civilization trash. And I mean, it's even now boring if I see all these Edward Hopper scenographies now on the stage. I know. I mean, everybody of us knows what will happen, and I think I will even be part of it. So this is really one big problem, and I think that's the moment that we have to understand. We have now really to take decisions. We have really to push it. For example, we have to push the basic income. I'm not 100% for it because of more Marxist ideas of revolution and so on and so on. But there are things without structural change, we can't change what's happening in the bubble of culture. Of course, we can change a bit. We can go out of this room. We can do this, but it will somehow be impossible. And I think another thing that seems very important to me, we had a very small talk before, but we said let's postpone it for later, because it's interesting that everybody's doing Camus and Boccaccio. And in the end of the day, these are very solidary, positive books. So you are fighting absurdity, and then you're kind of surviving in your humanity. But there's the oldest text about the plague and about the pandemic, which is King Oedipus by Sophocles. So a guy who is the rational king of a society, the plague breaks out, and he finds out that he's guilty. He's the reason, He's understanding he's perverse. There is something, let's say, cursed in our civilization that, as you described, is eschatological. It's not about just like this or that tipping point. There is something really wrong in this situation. And that's why when the oil price was falling down like this with this little music, I was very happy to see it, as if there could be, by chance, the open door of going out of the oil age, and going somewhere else. And then in the daily work, I see how difficult it is. For example, today we had then a discussion with a lot of European partners, how to continue. And everybody is saying, okay, then let's rehearse online now. Let's do a project together online. And if you can't bring it September, we bring it October, or you play live stream and we play live stream, and we bring it together to the homes of the people. And you are immediately only thinking, how can you continue to play like crazy?
But it's also, I had this conversation with Oliver Frljić here at this program as well. And then he mentioned something important for theater. I asked him precisely, can you imagine that it will now, everything will become virtual? I think you have to switch on the light, yeah?
Yes, I have the same impression.
And anyhow, and Oliver said, but the physicality, the physical aspect of theater is so important. So, that, and he said, you already had this kind of virtual theater even before coronavirus crisis, but whether this is a compensation or whether it can ever compensate the physicality about which Artaud was, for instance, talking about and so on, that's a big question. So I think now we have, especially people like, yeah,
I completely agree with Oliver. I have to say, I think theater is an art of assembly, of co-presence, of being really in the same space, and that's a political question for me. that you are in the very same space and you are not kind of watching to something. Perhaps you can give your comments in a live stream, and then we will answer to these questions, or we will not answer, or however, but you can't interrupt. Your feeling when you are on stage as an actor, you feel everybody in the room. You are so much connected. You are not so much connected normally, even not in your family, I guess, as in this moment of the representation. So it means so much, you know. It's a ritual of presence, of co-presence. And I think this can't be exchanged by something else. And it's very interesting that I mean, there's two things that are interesting. One thing is that I think everybody is feeling that. For example, a lot of things we are doing in theater spaces, like discussions, I feel we can also do it here. It's not so much changing, you know, people listening, people asking questions, and that's it. You can do it also in the virtual space. Other things, it's just impossible. It's impossible. I don't think that it will happen. You remember perhaps 20 years ago when everybody thought sex will only happen in the virtual space in like 5 years, and it didn't happen. It didn't happen at all. And on the other hand, what is interesting that in Germany and in many European countries, there is a plan to come back to normality for almost every sector, but not the art sector. The art sector, it's not relevant for the system. We don't know, perhaps September, perhaps November, it's not relevant for the system. And if you're not relevant for the system, perhaps the system is not relevant for us, for the art, for the theater, you know? So I think these are two things my co-artists, everybody who's working in theater found out we are not relevant somehow. That's a bit sad.
Yeah, but can you imagine the situation in ex-Yugoslavia, in the Balkans, for instance? You know, most of the artists would feel very happy to have a kind of response like Germany had to the art and culture world. I think those on the periphery of the European Union are fucked even more,
they are fucked completely, absolutely. You know?
Yeah. There are no subsidies. It will be very tough.
No, here we are back to the basic. We are back to the basic income question.
Yeah. That's what I wanted to say. I really agree with that point, and I hope it might revolutionize even the art world and theater and painting and writers who will understand that if you don't have a universal basic income, if you don't have a functioning healthcare system, that all these things go together. You cannot even have theater if you don't have a functioning society. I mean, and that was the role of theater, of course, from ancient times, to criticize society, to create a different society. But I'm talking too much again, and I can see questions coming.
Okay, go for it.
And so we can go a bit over the time, use a bit. Well, are you making theater?
Oh, wait.
No, I think now it's fine. I think
it's fine, huh? I have even a little light effect here, but
like a Jesus kind of Jesus coming back. Yeah. So I have we have some questions, and I suggest we can take 10 or 15 minutes more if you have time.
I can stay.
Great. Yeah. To answer this. So here comes a question. Just a second. An advice. What kind of advice would you give to young theater makers in these times in which quarantine is a luxury for some and a struggle for others? An advice in generally. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I would say, because the strange thing is what happened to me when I was in quarantine now since some weeks, I was remembering when I was a young, even not a maker. I was 20, 21, studying, making projects, discussing these projects the whole day with people to see if it will happen or not. And sometimes it happened, sometimes it happened not. So I think on the one hand, of course, to take the freedom to really decide what do I really want to do, and then to do it when it's possible. And the other thing is perhaps not going back to these rooms, searching for other spaces, for other ways of doing. The same thing for me. I had invited people to do big plays on the big stage in Ghent, in this old main stage, old house. And now we are searching for other places to do it, where it will be possible in September, in October, in November. There are so many ways of making theater. And for me, the last decision, but I don't want to push everybody into activism. Perhaps we need other stuff than theater at that moment. Perhaps we need to really find a solution for this so-called refugee crisis. perhaps we need political action, we need occupation, we need direct action, and not the translation into a room where we represent and criticize what is happening outside. Perhaps we have to go to the outside. So I think this is the other general advice I can give.
Yeah, it's hard to give advices in these times. I agree, because it's constantly changing, you know, the kind of future you expected. There is another question from Laura Marielle. What is your, but you kind of touched it, but maybe you can answer it anyhow. We talked about it. What is your opinion on how the quality of the content that is produced, namely by theaters and film, will be affected by COVID-19? Do you think that the less is more law will be back in town?
The less is more will be back in town. Yes, of course. I think the less is more will be back in town, and I'm quite happy about it. You know, in Germany we are tortured by turning stages, by fog, by fat suits, by stuff like that. So I'm now really reducing it, but just bigger scenographies, and the same texts again and again. And I'm happy if it goes more on the side of, let's say, creating than making karaoke with the same elements and the same texts on and on. So yeah, Arte Povera, I'm a big fan of it, and I hope it takes, it takes this chance. And I mean, it's if art is the reflection of society, what it is, then I hope that this reflection will be less is more.
There comes a political question, which I'm also interested to hear from you. I mean, I gave a kind of dystopian answer to this question already, and we can, but let me ask you, so what do you think the European Union will look like after this in terms of stability?
Yeah, I mean, what we see now is that the Commission is ruling all, and the peripheric nationalities or regions are just under the reign of the bigger countries. So what's happening since the European Union is existing, more or less. So I think this at the moment reinforces even more, and I think their emancipation of this kind of countries is important, and I think. Democratization of the European Union is really the next step we have to do. A year ago, or no, it's a bit more, 1.5 years ago, we made a project, I think also with the BITE Festival, the creation of the European Republic. So the people saying the European Commission is dismissed. We, the people, we take the power now. We are the voters of the European Union, and not this kind of bureaucrats in Brussels or somewhere else, in Berlin, and so on and so on. So I think if this can be a possibility, and for me, for example, the regularization of the people here, of the citizens, to make citizens out of the refugees, is the first call from, let's say, an economy of making profit and of irregularization to an economy of presence, an economy of life. And I think that we see this step now, kind of the nation states kind of working even against the European Union. It's a beautiful move. On the other hand, you have, of course, Orban, you have the neoliberalization of the whole cultural sector, and I think even of the health sector will be even stronger after Corona crisis. And yeah, so it's half full, half empty again. What is your answer, Srećko?
Oh, mine is, I would say, on the one hand, even more darker, and maybe on the other hand, hopeful. I mean, that's my persona, is kind of schizophrenic. I mean, half of the day I'm very apocalyptic, and half of the day I mean, there is a psychoanalytical term for it. I'm happy now that I talk to you, but the rest of the day it goes like your melody, you know. No, seriously, I think a domino effect is going to happen. You know, if Italy exits the Eurozone, I think it will be really bad. I don't have anything good to say about the current composition of the Eurozone, but I think it will be even much worse after Italy exits. If it exits, it might be the end of the Euro, which again doesn't necessarily have to be something bad, but my big fear is what you outlined already. You know, you will have this kind of fortresses, small islands surrounded by a wall, smart fence, drones, and then inside of it you will have dictatorships like the Orban one, you know. So you, on the one hand, you have a retreat to the nation state again, you know, by imposing citizenship, visas, everything what wasn't the case during the last decades. On the other hand, there is a big chance, as you say. You know, I just saw recently what happened in Milano. In Milan, where now, after the return to the normal, they're not returning to the previous normal, but they're reinventing a new normal so that they will keep the spaces for the bicycles and the people. So, for instance, or the donut economics example in Amsterdam. You know, these are very interesting examples. You know, we don't have to go so far as nationalizing hospitals, nationalizing railways, where I think they should actually be socialized, not nationalized. I don't want Boris Johnson to be in power of the railways. I want the society to be in power of the railways, you know. But I think you can also do it on a smaller scale. I mean, on the one hand, I see the necessity for even more radical pan-European transnational action. What you mentioned, the problems of the farmless workers in Brazil are similar to, you know, the workers in India or some others. So we definitely need a progressive international. But at the same time, I think we also need to come back to some sort of anarchism, if you want.
Like
the sense
and you see it on the level of cities. You see it on the level of cities, for example, throwing the cars out of the cities. What did Ghent, by the way?
I didn't know about Ghent. What's happening in Ghent with that?
In Ghent, they blocked the whole center of the city for cars. Not completely, but let's say mainly. So, and it was kind of, even my theater was against it because it became extremely difficult to transport in between the houses, the scenographies. But then after some weeks, you understood that this crazy decision was just good. It worked out, you know? So I think to take just these anarchistic decisions in neighborhoods, in cities and so on, and then try it out. And that's what is done now, Translation into kind of everybody helps everybody, and then it becomes the new normality. This is a beautiful concept, of course.
Let me go to more questions. Well, we come back to something. Just a second. We're coming back to something you mentioned already. So what do you think about the economic problems of artists now under COVID-19? How could they survive, even if we will find the solution for it in the end? But how can they survive this period which is coming now, the artists? I know it's uncomfortable to give any kind of advice, but...
No, I mean, I can give the advice for institutions. I think we should, as far we can, pay, for example, the evenings that are not played, the invitations that were planned but will not happen, because what can I say? I mean, that's the only money that is there. Of course, I also want, and you gave the example of Germany, that now the nations step into it and give the money to their citizens that they can't have, as they do it with the enterprises, with the bigger with the phone call of I put it away, and I think that's the only way. So who has a bit more has to help who has a bit less, and in the end of the day, of course, the responsibility lies into the bigger structures, like for
but example, you said, like you mentioned, so that some institutions, some theaters in Europe, you have some meetings already, like Ghent Theater, and then, I don't know, Volksbühne or Burgtheater. Are people coming together and discussing together what might be done beyond national borders, or not yet? How does that look?
Yeah, it happens like this. I mean, what's happening, for example, I have a theater company too, the International Institute of Political Murder, and we are touring internationally. And you see that it's very different. For example, in France, normally you are paid. If you can't play now, they don't pay you, of course, the travel and everything, because it doesn't happen, but just the money you would have get. They try to do it, and then you have other countries. For example, if we would have in Belgium, it's very difficult. And then in Italy is another situation, and everybody somehow tries to survive it on his own, you know. And on an European level, what we are trying to do is to just hold on the plans we made together, perhaps to postpone them a bit, but to more or less do it. If we don't play this year, we play next year. If you invited the other theater, the other group today, and it can't happen, we will invite you. We will invite you in, I don't know, in half a year, in a year. So that's what you can do. And then what you also can do, that you pay now and you invite later, or you pay for something that didn't happen, and so on. But there the limits are quite fast. For example, in my theater in Belgium, most of the people isn't working at the moment, because first of all, there is no work. On the other hand, that's the only way to get the money from the government, if you go in the workless, on the workless level. So it's kind of, you are trying to repair a situation of crisis with the tools of a very neoliberal society that is not prepared of, we were all even working in a kind of a crisis all the time, almost, as an institution. For example, we are ruling the Ente Gent now. It was 200 people there some years ago. Now we are doing it with 85, already. So we are, and that's only an example, and that's perhaps we are even, it's even not a very bad example. So we were almost in crisis, and now we are in a real crisis. And again, without cutting the logic of getting money only when you work, because these people, all these young artists we are talking about, myself, you, of course we are working the whole day at home, but we don't get money for it, because work is only when you sell it to a public. And if you don't do this, and if you don't disconnect this, especially in art, then the next crisis will come.
Yeah, that's not very optimistic and hopeful, but I agree with you. So let's jump. Maybe that will be the last question for the last part of our conversation. So jump from the concrete to the global planetary level again. I mean, I love with you, we can constantly jump from the concrete universal, as Hegel would call it, to a planetary framework. So a question by someone called Mu Wang is, the pandemic has exposed the corruption of the World Health Organization and the consequence of the attitude of appeasement towards the dictatorship since the 20th century. Do you think the future of globalization will be affected?
The future of globalization by the pandemics?
Yep.
Or by I didn't really understand why the World Health Organization was in, but let's put it out, because I not really agree on it, but anyways, or it's a strange argument. But of course, I mean, I hope that the future of globalization changes now. And I think I'm as schizophrenic as you are. On the one hand, I mean, I think there's one quote of Gramsci everybody knows, no? So the what is it, the pessimism of the reason, that tells me it will not change at all. It will be even worse, because after crisis, capitalism always became even worse. And the money is going back to the centers for the moment, and the global south has to pay the price, and so on and so on. And again, the countries producing the raw materials and the countries kind of selling the products in the end, it will be a disbalance even bigger than before. On the other hand, we mentioned it all, these anarchistic hopes of all these little of these little grassroots organizations and changings on a level of the state, more influence on the enterprises. What is happening now, it's postponed all these initiatives to make big enterprises, for example, in Switzerland or in Germany, responsible how they produce outside Europe, have tribunals, have a law, have a kind of a tracking, have kind of a consciousness of the consumers, and all this, I think is getting up at this moment. And I hope that we can, not giving it to the hands of Boris Johnson, of course, but to hold it somehow in the hands of the democracies, and have it transparent, even more transparent than before. Because I think one thing that happened now, I remember I was watching, I think a stream you did, I don't remember with whom, where you said you used some of your time at home to check WikiLeaks, and you learned a lot. And for me, it's the same. I learned through this crisis so much about how this so-called obscure globalization is working, how India depends from the US, how US depends from China, how China depends, and so on. You know? I didn't know that whole North Italy is more or less occupied by Indian enterprises. And this is the reason why, of course, Corona entered Europe through this door, like, by the way, in the 14th century, because it was then linked to Turkey and to Iran at that time. So all this, for me, is new. And I think this will change of how we, I don't know, how we conceptualize globalization.
Yeah, that's, I mean, that's my hope, to come to the other part of my divided or triple, I don't know. You know, I wouldn't underestimate the change in what Italian philosophers would mainly call, or French theory, you know, change of political subjectivity, and this kind of subjectivization which is happening due to the fact that, I don't know, more than 2 billion people at this moment are in some sort of quarantine, but certainly 90% of the people in the world, or even more, are thinking about this same situation. And as you said, I mean, that's the original meaning of the apocalypse, apocalypte, in the sense of unveiling, what is being unveiled. Of course, for you, for me, for the economists, or for some scientists, it was already clear, you know, that with climate crisis, you will have this kind of processes unleashed, that by austerity, you will ruin the healthcare system, and so on. But I think what's happening now is that this whole composition and global situation, as you said, how much do we rely on Romanian care workers or those who pick up the asparagus so that we can live our German lives, for instance, you know? All this is now being unveiled. And I think that's the good part. But the other part of myself always thinks, yeah, but people actually can't wait to go back to the new normal, to have a party, which is not bad to have a party, but to just kind of forget about the last 2 months. And then maybe it will just look like a dream, you know, like a bad dream compared to a reality which will be even worse towards the dream.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I think this is even the problem when I saw that the book from Slavoj Žižek was already out before the crisis started, and I think
typical Slavoj,
it's a typical Slavoj Žižek behavior, to being faster than reality. But I think this could even be part of the problem, that we are conceptualizing the whole situation before we lived it. You know, it's making like Traumdeutung before the night is over. I'm still dreaming and I'm analyzing it, normalizing it, bringing it into the framework I already know, so I can't live it, and my apparatus can change. So this
I think that's a really good point. We should stay open as much as we can, you know, and also use a new apparatus. I mean, that's what we saw with Agamben, for instance, you know. You cannot constantly, that his texts recently.
It's just like the state of emergency again and again, of course.
I mean, which is true, but you cannot.
True,
But it's getting much more complicated, I think, with everything today. So you cannot just use one theory or one concept and then explain the situation. I think we need much more.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we're coming to an end. Maybe for the end, what are your plans for the next weeks? As silly as the question sounds. What are you working on at the moment? You know, how will your life look like under quarantine the next weeks?
Actually, tomorrow is the 10th birthday of my younger daughter. So I'm preparing this. I think
that's great. Happy birthday.
I will say to her. And I'm editing the Jesus film on distance. That's also very annoying. I think it's editing on distance is really difficult. You upload, you talk, then you down, you know. And if you're talking together, it goes much faster, but it's impossible. So we do it on distance. I'm writing a little book called The Reconquest of the Future, also asking myself what will happen afterwards, but only taking notes, because I also think let's wait for after and then let's conceptualize it. And of course, I'm also rethinking projects I was planning before the crisis came. So how we wanted to do a new Congo tribunal, for example, in September in Eastern Congo, it will not happen. How do we do this? how can we, and for me, the most important step now for me is how to make out of this artistic action about seeing how these institutions don't want to lose the grip with the so-called normality, how all we want to come back. I want to find ways to not come back.
Yeah, I think that's so important. The normal was the problem. The normal was not normal, you know. If
the normal was perverse. You know, it's I'm sorry. Read King Oedipus. The normal is perverse.
I think this is a beautiful conclusion. Thanks a lot for your time. I
Thank you, Srećko.
We meet in person. We have
soon.
We have a big hug. Yeah. Thanks a lot, Milo.
Ciao. Ciao. Bye.